Alrighty everyone, welcome back. It is now September 22nd of 2023, and given that Disney and Bob Iger are going through a massive shakeup right now, there's been a lot of troublesome scenarios over his cost containment plan, over some of the agreements between the board of directors and Bob Iger, budgeting limitations of specific projects. We'll have more to talk about that down the road throughout the end of this week, but what's even all the more revealing has a lot more to do with the Snow White live-action remake that is nothing more than a downward spiral at this point, that is only creating more issues for Disney as they are looming with a big box office failure on their hands for next year. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you also very much for the great and kind support. And let's get right into all of this, shall we? Now, one thing about director Marc Webb is that with Snow White, Marc Webb has been going through many challenges for the film as re-edits are underway. One major development has to do with the ongoing issues between Rachel Zegler and Marc Webb, and the truth of this ever-developing grudge. As it turns out, the main reason why Marc Webb has had many issues with Zegler throughout the production of this film had much to do with her overly demanding behavior, and how Zegler constantly had creative issues and differences with the way Marc Webb was directing her character on screen. Now, reportedly, there was a specific directing style that Webb was utilizing with Zegler that she completely disagreed with, and it is something that caused Zegler to do so many extra takes for some of the most important scenes, since she had creative issues with Webb. Most of this had to do with her scenes interacting with the magical creatures. Zegler reportedly hated the way that Webb was distracting, of course, herself from those actual scenes, and directing those scenes as well, for Zegler on how to present the line of dialogue on screen, and there was a ton of arguments on set. So guys, let me just say one thing about this quick before I get to the next big piece about this. Now, the thing about Zegler is that she has been known to be very much like Brie Larson, very much like Phoebe Waller-Bridge. They believe that they have power over the director, that they have authority over the production of the film, or have a say in how a scene will be directed or written, whatever have you. And this is becoming a bigger trend in Hollywood. For those of you that do not know, there's a lot more cases where actors and actresses convince the directors and writers on how to do something, or they improvise lines of dialogue right off the bat with no supervision, and they really kind of push the director and or the writers to keep it into the movie. And that's when you realize that this is becoming a bigger and a growing issue, not just with Disney, but also with a lot more Hollywood studios out there, you know, using these actors and or actresses that are part of what I like to call the insufferables. People like Phoebe, Amber Heard, Rachel, and let's not forget about Brie Larson, and a whole lot more. You know, we know that this is becoming a very big issue for Hollywood, and it doesn't really seem to be ending anywhere near in sight. But let's continue on, shall we? Now, to top the list, just recently Zegler created, more issues for Marc Webb, that she didn't have the greatest things to say about him with the co-stars and those of the crew. This drama spread throughout production, and that Zegler has made it clear to Disney that she does not want to talk about Marc Webb in interviews before or after the release of the film, and depending on when the strikes end. Now, this is what is bothering Marc Webb the most, on how Rachel refuses to talk highly about Marc Webb as a director, and that if she even does, she will talk about the ongoing criticism of him, and how he was a hard director to work with, essentially, is what she's agreed with her manager and agent over to talk about in press interviews. Now, again, guys, the strikes are still going on. Rachel can't really say anything right now, but there are things being worked on in preparation. Whether they release before or after the release of this movie, it doesn't matter. Rachel does not want to talk about Marc Webb. And I think it has shined a lot in the past interviews where she absolutely refused to talk about Marc Webb. She talked about things like Andrew Burnap and his scenes quite possibly getting cut, or things about how Snow White 1937 had a prince that was like a stalker, crazy, dumb things like that were mentioned, but she never talks about Marc Webb, right? And that, as it turns out, has a lot to do with this. Now, this is where things get even more complex and what Marc Webb recently did. So, Webb recently approved the cancellation of multiple important scenes for Rachel Zegler. Webb decided to cancel all multiple scenes that had a lot of significant value for Zegler's singing and acting that used very few takes. However, this is where things get really intense. This is also another reason why Webb decided to cut many scenes for Rachel Zegler, since she held so much criticism over Andrew Burnap, who is a dear friend of Marc Webb, and he took that personally. Webb also is planning to cancel more scenes connected to Rachel, since the ongoing criticism, and Disney recently approved all of this. Disney seemingly is aware that Rachel is box office poison at this point, and they will do whatever to reduce backlash at all costs. Many of the scenes that were actually canceled by Marc Webb that were approved by Disney had a lot to do with her moments with the 7 magical creatures and specific songs in the second act of this movie, which is described to be the busiest moment of the film. Now, here's the bigger problem about Snow White, the live-action remake, is that we already know it's going to be a whole lot worse than the marketing for The Little Mermaid. We all remember The Little Mermaid's marketing, right? Where the trailer was getting heavily disliked, and to the point where they had to turn that off. We also know that there were a lot of things going on with the comments in there. You know, we all know that basically, at the end of the day, people like ZEGLER, people like Amber Heard, Brie Larson, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, it doesn't matter. They are box office poison, and they only tarnish their brand, or whatever they star in, whatever movie or franchise it may be. They always tarnish it, and they kind of drag it down. Now, here's the growing issue at large, is that Disney has no idea what to do with this movie. They are going through constant re-edits, trying to really rearrange scenes in this movie. And look, I'm at least somewhat glad that Marc Webb took a stance on things and really kind of decreased a lot of scenes for Rachel Zegler and took out some of the nonsense, but it's not going to fix this movie. It's not going to fix anything. But it just goes to show you that there was a hellish production for Snow White with a lot of toxicity, a lot of drama, a lot of high school-like behavior, and that a lot of it was rooted back to Rachel Zegler. You don't really hear too much about this, rooted back to Gal Gadot, right? So that's the other problem. Now, we know that Gal took a stance too. She walked away from Disney offering a Snow White prequel movie, or 2 prequel movies to be exact, focusing on the evil queen's backstory and her origin tale. And when she walked away, that really put things in Disney's face. Everything crumbled, their Snow White cinematic universe was nearly impossible, and the sequel to Snow White 24 fell apart for multiple factors that we already talked about many times. So, what's interesting about this, at the end of the day, is what Marc Webb did to take a stance against Zegler in order to, what he believes is going to save this movie. I don't believe it will, but it just goes to show you that there is a tension between these two individuals. So anyway, guys, drop a comment below, fill me in below in the comments what you all have to say about this, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys next time.
From night to moon, we hear them moans again.